Welcome to tonight's program on weatherization. Um, I'm just going to do a short intro while we wait for a few more people to come on if anyone else is waiting for the link, and then we'll get right into the program. So I'm Jenny DeRocher, and I'm a librarian in the Archives and Local History Department here at the La Crosse Public Library. Tonight we have Pete Grindeman, who will give a presentation on what he's learned through his experience of weatherizing old homes in La Crosse. He'll give you some tips and tricks on how to weatherize your home, save money on your heating bill, and live a more sustainable lifestyle. Pete uses thermal imaging equipment to find where heat is lost in homes. He has imaged over 30 homes in the La Crosse area. So this imaging allows him to educate homeowners on how to use materials around the house like plastic bags or things that you can buy at Menards to weatherize for the winter. Tonight, Pete has organized a drawing for participants. So we'll do it at the end of the program before the Q&A session. The winner of the drawing will win either a $50 basket of air sealing products along with Pete's coaching, or they will win a COVID-safe thermal imaging session with him. So we'll do that at the end. If you have any questions for Pete during the program, please put them in the chat and I'll relay them to him either during or after the program. So before I turn things over to Pete, I would like to acknowledge that the library where we are broadcasting from tonight occupies the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. And because I'm from the Archives and Local History Department here at the library, I would like to contextualize that and explain it a little bit further before we continue the program. The city of La Crosse occupies land that was once a prairie that was home to a band of Ho-Chunk. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, an attempt to forcibly and often violently remove Indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands located here east of the Mississippi River to occupied territory west of the river. Throughout the 1830s and 1840s, the federal government conducted a series of 6 attempts to forcibly remove local Ho-Chunk by steamboat via the Mississippi River to reservations in Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, and then finally to Nebraska. The historic steamboat landing where this took place is now Spence Park in downtown La Crosse, which is just across the street from the Charmant and right near the entrance to Riverside Park. However, many of La Crosse's Ho-Chunk found their way back to their homeland, and eventually the federal and local governments moved on to new strategies to eradicate Indigenous folks and culture from the newly established United States of America. So this program series this month is all about managing and preserving our historic homes so that our community can become more sustainable. I'm hoping that our speakers inspire you to think about the history of your home and even the history of the land that your home occupies. So I will now turn it over to Pete.
Okay, hi, my name is Pete Grindeman. I'm going to get out of this mask since I'm now the speaker. My experience in thermal imaging homes in the La Crosse area has seen too many problems come up again and again and again. So that's what we're going to talk about this evening. It's things that are so predictable that you guys can start working on these right away. This is where I live. It's a nice house out in the country. The solar electric panels on the left are for domestic hot water. The solar electric panels on the right are for space heat. I'll really advance the slide. It's a nice house built in 1983, 1,600 square feet on the main floor. This is my house, but I don't go to the poorhouse heating this place or running it. The sum total of electric and propane used for the year is under $1,000, no wood heat. This is all I use, is propane and electric and oodles of sunshine. And the way I accomplish this feat is in part that the greenhouse is used to help heat the house. Here it's shown set up as a solar hot air collector as it is each winter. No plants in the greenhouse in the winter because the calculated heat load of this greenhouse in the winter overnight would be so great that it would be about equal to the entire rest of the house. In the winter, as now, you can see the black plastic on the floor and hanging here. These two fans are thermostatically controlled The top one takes air from the bottom one takes air from the house, runs it out to the greenhouse. It warms in that space, which gets very warm on a sunny day. And then that warm air is brought into the house, and it's free heat. Can't say no to that. So this is all accomplished with some energy efficiency as well as the solar renewable energy. The blower door testing has been very helpful as far as finding leaks in this house. It is set up to depressurize the house. The house then leaks air inward, typically done in the winter, although it could possibly be done in the summer on a very hot day. But nevertheless, the air leaking in changes the temperature of whatever it strikes, and then the thermal imager is able to see that change in temperature and therefore reveal the leaks. The pressure that is used is very small. In fact, if you take a couple of nickels and a penny and stack the penny between the two nickels, the height of those three coins is nearly exact 1/5 of an inch, which is the pressure at which if you were to draw soda or water up a straw, that height, there's very little pressure, but that is the pressure that the blower door runs at. I want you to keep those two nickels and penny handy, because what you're going to see is pictures that show our houses leaking like sieves at such a modest pressure. That pressure is actually corresponds to that of a 20-mile-an-hour wind. So it's a little bit more than we normally face, but we certainly see more than 20-mile-an-hour winds here when the weather is bad. When I first started thermal imaging, my house measured just under 4 air changes per hour. That's not a bad figure. It's now 2.8 air changes per hour, which is of course better. The Crosse area homes that I have measured vary between 2 air changes per hour and 16. 16 air changes per hour is almost unlivable house, but it was in the city of La Crosse and people living in it. Times have changed a lot. 90 years ago, we lived in a world that looked nothing like the world we live in today. We had cars, but they were barely recognizable as the same machines of today. Barely recognizable. And our homes have changed as well. Also being barely recognizable as usable for the same purpose. Of course, I'm not talking about the outward appearance. I'm talking about the changes under the hood. We have, now we have insulation, vapor barriers, weather resistive barriers, better windows, and renewable energy. And some of these are actually newer than my house. In particular, vapor barriers were not standard in 1983. They've since become standard. Weather resistive barriers, they've been around for quite a long time. And windows have been getting better for quite a long time, but good windows are not great. We'll talk about that really great windows are not great. Not nearly as great as, for example, a thin wall, 2x4 wall is actually better in terms of creature comfort and everything else than the best of windows a person could buy. So living in the city is certainly green. Everything is close at hand. La Crosse actually led the US in number of people who walked to work or rode a bicycle to work for cities of 50,000 population or greater. That was that says a lot for our community. So living in the city is a green thing to do, but living in a home that hasn't been updated since this car was new, well, that's not exactly living green. I mean, I don't think anyone would think this car or this house from that many years ago, if left unupdated, would be considered green. The basics of what we're up against is heat goes where cold is. Insulation slows the movement of that heat, can't stop it. Hot air rises. The air sealing stops the movement of air. So we can stop the movement of air, but we can't stop the movement of heat. And most problematic is that moisture condenses where cold is. We'll talk about that as a diagnostic tool, actually. So air sealing is our first priority. It is difficult to heat a tent, but it can be done. It is impossible to heat a screened porch. Many of our homes are not even up to the level of living in a tent. They're just that leaky. So here is the first problem area, or problem effect that causes problems. It's stack effect pressure, and that is to say that the warm air is trying to rise out of the house in the winter and it does so in many locations. The scary thing is it does this without a trace. Attic hatches are frequently a problem. I'll show you pictures of that. All that warm air leaks up into the attic through the attic hatch without a trace. Ceiling light fixtures, same problem. The warm air disappears. We have no idea it's going away. Now this is all being made up by cold air leaking in at the lower elevations in the house, and that we notice, and we think that is the problem. The reality is both are a problem. The warm air wouldn't get out the top if there was no cold air coming in to replace it. It might leak out a little. If the top was sealed up tight, the bottom, the cold air wouldn't get in the bottom. The stack effect pressure is relatively small, but the problem is it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is for the duration of the heating season, that pressure being proportional to the height of the building. So it's worse on 2-story buildings, and proportional to the difference in temperature between inside and outside. Wind is another problem. The pressure of the blower door test is equivalent to that of a 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing on the side of the house. It's actually blowing on all sides at the same time. So figures that I quote as far as air changes per hour, those are overstated. And the experts don't entirely agree as to how much they're overstated. But when I talk about 16 air changes per hour, that's not actually a wind in the house. It's not quite that bad. So what happens in operation is that the blower door reduces the pressure, cold air leaks in wherever it will, and this cold air cools various parts of the house, whether it be around windows or whatever. And then the thermal imager is able to detect that small change in temperature and indicate that that is in fact where the air is coming in. It's commonly believed that the thermal imager can see cold air. It cannot see cold air, but it can see the effects of cold air. So again, the pressure we're running at is equivalent of drawing water up a straw 1/5 of an inch. So I encourage you, if you have it in your pocket, to set up 2 nickels and a penny with the penny in the middle. That's nearly exact 1/5 of an inch, or as this machinist type say, 200 thousandths. That is the pressure. And when you look at with me at these pictures of air leakage, you'll be aghast at how much air can leak into a house with a pressure of that little of height of water. It's called a 1/5 of an inch water column. So as we work on our homes, we always have to be sure we're working on the problem and not the symptom. This mouse is a symptom. It's tempting to say the mouse is a problem. He's not. Same with the static shocks. Not a problem, sort of not. It's a symptom. Both of these are symptoms of holes in the house. Well-sealed homes have humid air in the winter. Most years I run my dehumidifier until well into December. As far as the conditions in our house, most of us, we have some version of a thermometer that we trust, but too few of us have hygrometers to measure the humidity. And the reason why this is important is because if the air is humid or dry, we should operate the house a bit differently. For example, oh, and these, by the way, this particular model can be picked up at the Big Idea closeout store on Lowe's, $10. I have tested these side by side with hygrometers and thermometers I have spent considerable money on, and they're nearly the same. But if this reading is 46%, which is a little to the high side for wintertime, we certainly want to run our bathroom vent fan when we're showering. But if the house is very dry, we have static shocks, we should not be running, or we don't need to run the bathroom vent fan when showering, because this is a humidifier. This is a humidifier. We're paying to run it. And then when we run the vent fan unnecessarily, or when we're running the vent fan and a humidifier together, we're really doing too much work when, if we knew what the condition of the house was and we thought ahead as far as what we wanted, how we want to operate the house, we could take advantage of this free humidification. The only caveat is the humidity gauge that we just looked at. Don't put that near the kitchen or bathroom. Central hallway close to bedrooms would be a better place because we don't want it to be reading artificially high because of bathroom and kitchen humidity. So the number one problem I find when I thermal image homes is people leave windows open. The people know that I'm coming over to thermal image. The owner and I will typically go around, make sure all the windows are latched. And all too often we find a window that's open. And I guess the reality is if you share a house with lots of people, someone may have to check the windows every 2, 3 weeks, something like that, because people open the windows, burn something on the stove or whatever, and then fail to close the window, just kind of forget about it. So our first order of business is to fix holes big enough for a cat to get in. And this sounds pretty funny, but this is from a home that I thermal imaged at La Crescent. It was a nice house. The owner complained about the air being dry, which was not expected for the age of the home. And when I blower door tested it, the air pressure or the air leakage rate was at least twice as high as what I was expecting. So we knew there was a problem because this staircase is right in the middle of the house. And there's cold air coming into the middle of the house. This is just a couple of steps up from the bottom in the split level house. And how can this be? How can this cold air be getting right to the middle of the house? Well, I had to run, but the owner, knowing that there was a significant problem, he went sleuthing in the attic, and he reported me a couple of days later that there was this utility chute measuring 6 inches by 4 feet, and went straight through to the basement. It was never closed off on the top. As best I can tell, the owner reported that there was piping in here for the in-floor heat system and for electrical conduits and things like that. And as best I can tell, the builder intended to close it off one day, but he forgot about it. And here we are. The house had been standing for 15 years with this air chimney in the middle of it, wasting all this air that they were heating. Now, this, of course, is a problem economically, but it's also a problem in terms of the durability of the house, because this comfortable air is going up into the attic space and potentially condensing on the underside of the roof deck, which can lead to rotting and mold and other issues. So we really do want to keep the tops of our houses tight for economic reasons and for protecting the structure. Now, this was an interesting one. This is not a picture of the house, of course. This is the same slide you saw earlier. But historic home in La Crosse, they had converted a crawl space to a half basement for storage. So this brown area here was covered with a nice layer of concrete. All was well. There was a doorway through here, and there was these vents here, which are necessary for a crawl space. This new half-height basement had 4 vents, all still open. Nobody noticed that they were there when they converted the crawl space to a basement. So there was 4 vents here, about 6 inches by 12 inches, all 4 left open, pouring massive amounts of cold air into the basement. Now, I should point out that if this was still a crawl space, there should be insulation shown on this duct. I'm not sure the picture shows this here. And then, of course, the any water piping, which neither of these are, should be insulated as well. Now, most distressing was not this house, but one just like it in the Crescent, where son of a friend reported that their heating bills were twice as high as their mother's house, which was the same size, or just about the same size. So what was wrong? Anyhow, I went over there to thermal image, and the leakage rate was insane. And we got around to checking out the second floor of the house, and a hurricane was coming down the steps at us as we went up the steps to the second floor. The one side of the house, nothing unusual. Left side of the house, a bamboo reed type curtain door was bowing outward. And what had happened was a chunk of the ceiling in that closet had fallen off, a big chunk. I didn't get to see it. The owner was really embarrassed. He wouldn't let me see it. But I gathered by his hand motions, it was around 2 feet by 2 feet, had fallen off. And on homes of this age, there is no air barrier system. The only air barrier you have is the plaster. So when there's a defect in the plaster, and we'll see other defects in the plaster, your house is open to the world. So with that big of a hole in the top of their house, and theirs was cut into a hill, so the stack effect pressure was higher there. But their heating bill at $1,600 a winter on natural gas in the Crescent, which is insane, even that wasn't enough to make their house comfortable. And then since they were a friend of a friend situation, I heard later that he had fixed the hole, but didn't tell his wife what happened. And then out of nowhere, she says, well, what happened to our house? Because she could tell it was way more comfortable to live in. And then he had to tell her what happened. Pretty embarrassing, all that energy lost because someone didn't maintain the house properly. So our Model A was driving around in La Crosse during the era when we heated with coal, or possibly wood, but it was delivered to the house with a coal chute like this. This picture and the one following, provided by Anita Taylor Daring, we don't know if this coal chute is still in use. We kind of think that it was just kept for nostalgic reasons, because they did a nice job overtaking or reusing, should I say, this window to make for the ports for the condensing furnace system. So there must have been some care put on it. But another house that we don't know enough about but are concerned is this one, where the coal chute is ready to go, ready for the coal man to come back anytime. He's probably not coming back soon. So a better plan would be to build a wall and close this off, because this cast iron or sheet steel door is going to be just not effective at all as far as keeping the cold out in the winter. So we get the biggest holes under control. Now we're on to holes big enough for a mouse to get in, and there's lots of mice. And they're motivated. This is a thermal image of a mouse out in my yard. It's 33 degrees outside temperature. The spot in the picture is at 39 degrees, and some part of the mouse is at 77 degrees. But he heard that there's free food at your house and it's warm. So he's motivated to get in there. All day long, he thinks about getting in your house. One of the really common ways of air to get out or mice to get in is that those coal and wood heated houses all had chimneys that ran hot. So the building codes would have the chimney spaced, or better yet, the wood of the structure spaced away from the chimney. And then the chimneys fall into disuse, they fall into disrepair, we break the top off of them, we roof them over, but we don't actually close those gaps between the chimney and the wood structure around it. So these were taken with a camera about the size of my pinky here. So this is the chimney. This is where the flue used to come in. It was capped off, not exactly sealed, but close enough. But this opening right here, which is where we are right now with the camera, leads up to the chimney. So now down to the right here, this is the wood part of the house. This is the masonry of the chimney. And we get a little bit higher, and it's wide open. It's wide open. It's the only thing that's closing it up is this insulation that fell out of the attic. And then if you look closely, that insulation is black. And the reason why the insulation is black is because it does a good job filtering dust out of all the warm air that leaks out of our houses. So while it is a lot of work to break off a chimney and remove that, we should at least make an effort before this area got walled in. And that's what happened here. That's why this gap is only in the corner. It doesn't go all the way across. And they built a partial wall here. Would be to foam that shut. If we're not going to remove the chimney, we can at least air seal to it. So that's a very common problem with homes that have chimneys. Now we're down to holes that a bug can get in, and there'll be a lot of those too. That's why when you take a wall apart, or if your house gets a little too busy in September or October because there's all kinds of bugs in it, that's because there's small holes that the bugs come in. Sometimes they'll live in the house for the winter and let themselves out in the spring. My house was like that until I found some of those holes and closed them off. This is a shed door, but it's actually a good shed door. If you notice, it has a couple of layers to it. You'd be lucky to have an attic hatch this good, because I thermal image you guys' homes. I know you don't. What they typically do is have a single sheet of plywood, no insulation, and much too commonly is the hatch is sitting on basically door trim, which is the end of the world, which is then in turn sitting on a textured ceiling. And that's what happened here. The door trim that made the hatch, which could have been acceptable, instead of sealing it to the ceiling, or instead of doing anything to make sure that it was airtight, they just nailed it in place and forgot about it. And now in normal operation, because this attic hatch is at the place of the highest pressure in the house and the warmest air, this would be reversed. Not quite that velocity, but reversed with all this warm air leaking through there without a trace. Nobody notices it. Nobody thinks a thing of it. And this is where we lose a lot of warm air. Now this next slide, this is a fine attic hatch. You can tell that it's insulated because it's nearly the same temperature as the house around it, but they didn't weather strip it. And that's what these streaks are. These are streaks of cold air coming in during the negative pressure of the test. And this is very easy to fix, by the way. What a guy would do here is raise up the hatch and either take it down and put on some sealing products with double stick tape, or even just press them in there, because the hatch will hold them in place. Big problem in older homes and one new home we'll see is leaks under the exterior wall. Now the story is, oh, I'll show you a few more leaks. So this is one. Now bear in mind, this is the pressure. You take out your 2 nickels and your penny. This is the pressure equivalent to drawing water up a straw that high. It hardly seems possible that a small gap could allow that much air to get in, or this much air to drift off the wall. You notice that some of these cold air streaks are almost as long as the shoes are long. And the story is that the small gap underneath the wall frame, between that and the subfloor, is what's causing this leaking, and that those problems went away in the 1990s when we learned to caulk the frame of the wall to the subfloor. That's not it. That's not it. This is a house at Black River Falls that I was helping install baseboard trim on it. And I noticed out of nowhere, wait a minute, there's no nails, there's no fasteners, there's nothing on the bottom of the sheetrock. And I got out the magnets and there's nothing. These magnets here are the lowest elevation on that wall where there's any fasteners. The sheetrock from there to the height of 8 inches or thereabouts is unattached, just floated in the air. And the flooring had already been installed. You'll notice that there's quite a stout gap between the flooring and the sheetrock. Well, that was because I had by then attached the sheetrock to the sole plate. The sole plate would be this one here, this one right there when it's in position. And the sheetrock moved, closing gaps that range from modest to over 1/8 of an inch, 50 feet of gap between this room and the adjoining room on the other side of the house had been open. House had been built in 1977, so those gaps have been open for 43 years, closed in an hour with using half of the screws in a box of screws from Menards that cost $5. So I don't know what's with the carpenters that they can't complete their projects too close to quitting time. I don't know, but nevertheless, the lesson here is that when you have the floor apart, for example, you're taking up carpeting and you need to move the baseboard down because you're putting in something else, you have to check this. Because I saw this on my house too. I did not know that it was anything but a one-off thing. And now that I've seen it twice, and then I've seen these thermal images, it's like, how can that much leakage be just because the sole plate wasn't glued to the subfloor? So that's not it. There's this house here. I don't know if this one has plaster walls. It's either, and this one here is an older house. Here it may be that the plaster just wasn't finished all the way to the subfloor. But that needs to be checked. And it's not that hard to check if you're working in that area anyway. So that's what makes it a one of the several non-thermal imaging problems that we're going to tackle. Problems that can be addressed without thermal imaging is what I should call them. So we got that issue at the floor. And then new windows. We can fix all the problems with new windows, right? Salesmen tell us that. Well, no, we can't, because we need to learn to install windows properly. And I submit that we don't do a very good job of installing windows. We've got to do better than this. If you notice, this window has a tiny bit of leakage here. Oh, here's leakage, by the way. Notice the feathery nature of these color bands. That's moving air that has done that. This very smooth parallel situation here, that's conduction. There's a little bit of air movement here. So this is a fine window with very little leakage, except where it attaches to the house. That's really uncalled for, but that's how we do it. And here's another one. I got hundreds of these pictures to show you guys, but I won't. This one's the fun one though, because this is my dad in the picture. That's kind of why the temperature scale is skewed. Oh, and I should have mentioned this before. Now, all the thermal images will go from blue to red, and the temperature at which they're showing is here. And you always want to look at that temperature, because sometimes what you'll see looks like a horror show. And then you'll see that the difference in temperature between the hottest place in the image right there and the coldest place in the image, probably here, is only modest, 10 degrees or something like that. And then the whole thing is not much to worry about. But this is a lot to worry about. And Dad later reported the maintenance guy took the trim off to see what was going on there. And he just looked right through the building. He's looking at the street scene outside, because the people who installed the window made no attempt whatsoever to install it properly. And then if you install a window correctly, it'll look like this. And it's not that hard to do. We're gonna talk about how to do that, as a matter of fact. Does that look nice? Just a little bit of conduction losses here and air leakage losses here. None. And there's no need for air leakage here. Now, this is at my house. Okay, this is a common problem too. This is a properly installed window. There's no leakage up here. But what this is all about is it's a double hung window and the latch was set improperly so that the top sash wasn't pushed all the way up. When you, a non-thermal imaging project for you guys as well, is to check all the double hung windows, latch them up, and then push forcibly on the top sash. And if it rises up, then you know you have the same problem that I did, which is that it wasn't set correctly. These are metal spacers I made. You can make these out of cereal box, cardboard, plywood, whatever. But I had to raise the top sash 1/4 of an inch to get it to seal. I don't know why the window was built that way. It's sealed now. Another project we'll get to eventually, ceiling light fixtures and ceiling fans. They look like this, nearly always. Now, bear in mind, we're talking about either the upstairs of a house or the main floor of a 1-story house. If this was a kitchen in a 2-story house, there'd be no place for the cold air to get in, so that's not it. But anyway, they look like this. This is, we'll see. Outlets on an outside wall, they look like this. And then I'll show you a remedy for this, but notice in particular the extreme difference in color here. There's 22 degrees difference between inside and between the hottest and coldest. Thermal imaging is always done when it's below freezing outside, preferably below +10 degrees outside, so that the moving air is able to really finally show off what is happening in the images. But this is moving air. We can see the thin feathers here, and they reach out rather far. And that's what outlets too often look like. So what are we going to fix first? Most of what I've shown you so far can be fixed for no money. But we need to be careful not to plan on making our house perfect, because if we make the project too big, we are just going to give up and say, it's beyond any hope, I give up. And everything we can do to make our house better, it all helps. I kind of liken it to being outside in the winter. I forgot my hat, but I'm still going to put my gloves on, right? I'd like to have my hat too, but I'm going to put my gloves on no matter whether I have my hat or not. And that's how this is. Each thing you can make better helps. So first ideas, reclose the windows and check them, because unless you live alone, but people will open windows and forget to close them. It happens. The longer minimum runtime on the thermostat is an easy thing to do. And what that's all about, we'll talk about that. Or programmable thermostat, those are easy to do too. Those are pretty easy to install. Vacuuming the coil on the refrigerator is important. I'll show you some horror stories there. And door thresholds, those are made to be adjusted. I don't know if everyone knew that. It was my sister-in-law taught me that door thresholds can be adjusted. And then, whoops, and then we'll talk about sealing the light fixtures on the top floor of your house. All easy projects. And if you look closely, none of these require money. Great return on investment. So the Lux brand thermostat, and others switch differently, but the whole idea is the furnace and thermostat people, they want to keep you comfortable. And if they have to switch on the furnace, run it for 30 seconds, shut it off for 3 minutes, and run it for 30 seconds, they'll do it, no problem. Your problem, my problem, is the first thing it does is it heats up the heat exchanger, then it heats up the ducts, and then warm air comes into my space. Then it shuts down. Some of that warm air is retained, some of it's lost. Then 3 minutes later, it does it again. The house won't rise in temperature that much in 5 minutes. So I have mine set for a 5-minute minimum runtime. Strictly a matter of sliding this little dip switch up here, and then it'll set the minimum runtime for 5 minutes. On some of the other brands that Menard sells, it's just a front page setup item, what the allowable swing in temperature is. It depends on your comfort, but if you can tolerate a whole degree, some of them will maintain a 1/2 degree, and they maintain a 1/2 degree constant temperature by turning the furnace on and off, on and off, on and off. If you can tolerate a degree or 1.5 degrees, what you're going to get for your trouble is less wear on your furnace, because less heating and cooling cycles on the heat exchanger, and you're going to spend less energy heating the ducts and the furnace in the basement when you really want the heat up where you are. Dust on the refrigerator coil. This is fun. This picture was sent to me by someone who asked me not to use their name, so I won't. But the refrigerator coil is frequently low on the refrigerator. It may be all the way up the backside, but nevertheless, on occasion, meaning once a year, that's enough, it needs to be cleaned off. So this doesn't happen to you. this refrigerator was almost slated to be replaced because it was running constantly and it couldn't keep ice cream cold. And it turned out it was just that the heat exchanger coil in the back was buried in dust. That's all it was. So at any rate, I recommend doing that in the spring, only because then when the house is the warmest in the summer, the coil is the cleanest. But once a year is enough unless you have a lot of dust in your house in terms of giant fleet of pets or something like that. Adjustable thresholds. These are the screw adjusters. You don't have a lot of travel, and you don't want to set them up too high either. I recommend that you set them up to maybe where it touches a credit card or so. And the reason why is the house will change shape during the seasons, humidity, temperature, etc. And if you accidentally set it so tight that people aren't closing the door, you're going backwards there. So look to see if your threshold is adjustable with screw adjusters. They're not standard, but they're common. And then you're going to find that I solve a lot of problems with plastic bags from the grocery stores. The recyclers really don't want them. They have a lot of reuse potential. I just take the bag, roll it up into a tube, cut off these slices, which makes hoops, cut the hoops open to make strips, and I can use them to fix a lot of things. But you ask, well, why don't I just use fiberglass? Well, fiberglass is not airtight. Fiberglass cannot do this. This is water in my sink, which is held there by 2 strips of this plastic. And I just zigzagged it back and forth in the bottom of the drain there. I didn't pound it in or anything like that. That's just being held there by the weight of the water above it. So that's why, aside from the fact that it's free, we're trying to get rid of them, it is airtight and is very useful for things like this. Oh, but first, we're going to talk about the existence of electricity. And I'm going to show you what Pete did. And thou shalt not construe this as Pete ordering you to do this. Okay, that's my story with electricity. I'm just illustrating what I did. Anyhow, so the question has come up in the past about gaskets to go under switch plate covers. And I have thermal imaged enough homes to find them to be not particularly effective. And they do cost a few pennies, under $1, but for what you get, they're not really that much, they're not worth it. So what I do is I loosen up the screws on the cover plate and I let the cover plate come forward about twice the thickness of a credit card. So there's some amount of gap to work with. And then just take these strips of plastic and work them in behind there and just go round and round and round 3-4 times, whatever you can fit in there. And then some of it's going to get over to here. That's fine. Won't affect the operation of the switch or anything. And after 4 or 5 trips around, it kind of feels like it's stuffed. Then I just tighten this, take the credit card out, tighten the screws on it, and I call it done. And the question is, well, does that work? Well, it didn't work quite as well as I hoped. This was thermal imaging of the same switch plate. And we can see there's some leakage around the edge. The change in temperature from the hottest to the coldest part of the picture is pretty modest, so that's a good sign. Most of the cold is right where the switches actuate, and I'm not willing to close them off. But what I would do if that was an outlet that I never used, is I would put a big sheet of plastic behind the cover plate first, and then fit the cover plate on close, stuff in a bunch behind it here, and then trim everything up so it looks nice. And the idea on that is the outlets are not available unless you poke the holes for where the connectors go in, and then they're totally available. But at any rate, so this was not too bad of a success. Great return on investment since it was free. Ceiling light fixtures most of the time are black. This fiberglass on here is not intended to seal air. Fiberglass doesn't seal air. That's one thing you're going to have to learn. Is fiberglass insulates as long as the air is kept from moving by some other means. In this case, there was no other means. This is a hole that goes right through to the attic. When the fixture is first taken down, some insulation fell out with the light fixture because that's a hole in the house. There's little holes in the back for various other purposes. Those are holes in the house too. When you're working on a light fixture though, you got to be a big boy and buy a ladder, because you don't want to end up like my mother, fall off a chair and end up with a pin in her hip. Ladders are cheap. Buy a ladder. So at any rate, to close this off, it's a minor project, new fixture or existing. And I'll show you how to, another way to do an existing one. Just drape plastic grocery bags over the back of the fixture. Remember, the plastic is airtight, but the fiberglass is not. Nothing elegant, just a few bits of tape to hold it in place, and then put the thing back up. Now, it's not as easy to put back up with that sheet of plastic there, but if you get a couple of threaded rods from Ace Hardware, 60 cents a piece, put them up first, then you fish the, or thread the fixture over those threaded rods, put a couple nuts on there to hold it in place temporarily. And now you got all day in the world to make sure everything fits properly, and then replace these with the screws that came with the fixture one at a time. And lastly, you trim that, trim the edges off here. And you can trim better than I can, but even this is barely noticeable. Now for your trouble, what you get is this. This is a different fixture, thermal imaged. I had done this before. This was nailed. As far as air leakage, that's done for. But the other way of doing that, if you don't want to take the fixture off or you're not replacing it, is just to drop the fixture 1/4 of an inch or so, and then take a sheet of plastic, split it to the center, because you're not sure where the wires are, and you're just going to thread that in there as best you can. Just slide it in there. Any bit of that fiberglass you can cover increases the pathway for air leaking and will make the leakage less. And that's easy to do. Taking the fixture off, yeah, that's pain in the neck. I don't know if I would do that unless I was changing the fixture. So the mice are back. They've made more, and they're coming for your house. They heard there's free food. The mouse holes, they're easy to find if you just go look for them, which is to say get a small diameter inspection mirror and go outside and imagine that you're about 3 inches tall and you're cold and you know where there's free food. Just walk around the perimeter of your foundation, especially looking at the top of the stone, concrete, or cement block wall to where the house sits on it. Just look straight up with the mirror, and you may find these holes. If you do, what I recommend you do is to cut strips of a soda can. Any scissors will work. You don't need a chin snips. Stick them in the hole first, and then shoot in this Great Stuff foam. There's many varieties of Great Stuff foam. Some of them are made to keep pests out. I don't know how well they work. I've not used them. But anything that will deter the mice, like these metal strips, plus a soft foam, should be sufficient. And so now we're down to some really small gaps. Caulk is very cheap and effective. These are standard size containers. The more expensive ones tend to be soft material, suitable for kitchens, around bathtubs, things like that. The cheapest stuff is still outdoor rated and is suitable for caulking around windows or other gaps in the house. This is 1/10 of a gallon, and if you squeeze it out to make a nice smooth 1/4 inch diameter bead, it'll make a bead 34 feet long, which seems really long until you get going, and then the stuff disappears pretty fast. The rules on caulking, though, is on the outside of the house, we want to keep the rain out, but otherwise it is to be open. And the reason why is the moisture that condenses in our walls has to be allowed to keep going, because if it doesn't keep going, it'll build up there, humidity will get high, and it'll lead to mildew and rot issues. So the outside is to be open but rainproof, and then the inside is for making the house airtight. And there's, yeah, anywhere you can see a gap, unless the gap is very large, you want to just caulk that. If the gap is very large, we have some other products, and I'm going to quick show those right now. So Jenny, do I do anything special to unshare my screen here and bring up the camera?
Yeah, you could stop sharing your screen.
Okay, so I'm going to pause share. Will that do it? Oh, stop share. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so is this me? Okay. I can see me, so I hope you guys can see me. Okay, so if the gaps are large, then you want to go first with something like this backer cord. It's made to go into various places and then be caulked over the top of it. Pretty easy to implement. In certain situations, you can put this, if it's not exposed to sunlight, you can put this backer cord in and nothing else, and it's fine. But this and many other products are not UV resistant. Backer cord comes in bigger sizes. This is about the size of my finger. There's another size they have several sizes, but the biggest I saw is about the size of my thumb. So you really close off a large gap with that. And if that wasn't enough, for example, the hole in the attic, what the homeowner did there was he cut a plate of insulation board like this, cuts either with a pocket knife or utility knife, and then he glued it in place with, I don't remember which kind, but something like these products, and he just glued the styrofoam plate over that opening. Wasn't exactly, it was weatherproof. I don't know if I'd want a workman walking on it. That was a pretty dangerous situation if there was no wood put over that. So at any rate, but he closed that off. That was weather tight. Some other products that we need to be familiar with are window seals. And there's a couple of kinds here, depending on whether the windows are old or new or where on the window. But this is a D seal that goes pretty commonly on casement windows. And comes like this, separated. It's applied by just taking off the release paper and sticking it on wherever the failed seal is. I'll show you that on my window. That's coming up here. Very easy to do. And that thermal imaged quite well as far as being up to its original R2 glory. I'm going to show you Natalie's slide from last week again, because you guys got to get it that new windows cost a great deal of money, and new windows are not great. They're better. They're definitely not great. Certainly, they're not anywhere nearly in the league of, for example, a wall. This is a V seal, and this is what you'll find on old double hung windows. You would want to put this between the window sash and wherever it is at the moment. And that is to say, the bottom sash, you would slide this from the top down. You could do this when the window is open, but you can also do it when the window is closed by leaving the release paper on this one and just sliding that down into the gap. I set them up open outward. And the reason why is, while there is pressure inside the house trying to get out, I think, speculation, I think the wind pressure on the outside is a bunch greater when it is windy out, and the pressure on the inside isn't that much. It's 24 hours, 7 days a year, 7 days a week, the stack effect pressure. But unless the gaps are very large, I think this will hold it in. Some experimentation will be needed. And then another form of seal, which is common, is this. I didn't think to open this one, but it's just a square or rectangular foam with a release paper on it. They come in so many different sizes, and all you're going to do is pick the size that fits best in the spot that you need to close up. And that could be any number of things, for example, on a door or whatever. But there's really no wrong place to put this, as long as if the door closes or if the item closes and it seals, it's the right product. This last one I want to show you, this is what's typically used to close off the air spaces after installing a window air conditioner. It's open cell foam. You can breathe through this, no problem, but it's supposed to be weatherproof. Well, this one is weatherproof, and it was made weatherproof by me by wrapping it in the plastic bag that came from the home center. Now, this is not sunlight proof, so you can't leave this up there for years, but if you take your air conditioner down each fall, as I do, it works fine. Just wrap it up in the early summer and put the air conditioner in place. It's airtight. Then when it's time to take it down, you just put the foam away and put new on next year. So those are the products that I wanted you to see. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and we'll move ahead here. Okay, door sweeps is what you're up to if you don't have an adjustable threshold. Pretty darn easy to install, not expensive. Oops, Jenny did this now. Okay, I'm screen sharing. There we go. Very affordable. This is Ace Hardware here in La Crosse, less than $5. If you're putting this on a wooden door, correction, if you want to put this on a wooden door, you can just take a nail and tap the starter holes and just screw it in place. If you have a metal door, then you do need to drill holes. And that's, I wouldn't say that's a project, but it's a little more work than, say, a wooden door. Now, new windows, price, quality, or delivery. Pick any two. I know you guys pick quality because I thermal image your windows, and they're good windows. I don't know if you pick price or delivery, but we have a third option. This was illustrated by Natalie, and I want you guys to get this. We can repair windows. We looked at the V seal, and there's other things that old windows can be repaired. I'll just quickly review what she showed us. But the short story is, new windows are not remarkable. A really expensive new window is about R3.6. When you're looking at, for example, at my house, I'll show you the storm windows at my house, where an R2 window has an R1 storm window over it. I'm up in that league, and I didn't spend anywhere near that much money. Okay, so we do want to talk about repairing windows, especially. Oh, and this is how windows work, by the way. I don't know if this was really well explained, but the insulating value of glass is just about nil. What makes a window insulate is the stationary air layer at its surface. On a single pane window, there's a thin air layer on the outside because the breeze, the wind, etc., strips that away. And on the inside the window, there's a little bit thicker stagnant air layer. That's your insulation value on a layer of glass. If this was a layer of aluminum or something, it would be almost the same because the insulation value through the glass is very small. Now, this is a triple pane window. We have stationary air on the outside, stationary air on the inside, 2 more stationary air layers, and then these here. That's a pretty good window. But we can approximate that by a single pane window with a storm window, or an earlier double pane window with a storm window, and we can get some pretty good results without spending a fortune. This is representative of the heat loss through a single pane of window, not the area of the box, but the height of the line. This is what an R1 window would lose. This is an R3.6 window, the height of this line. This is a garden variety wall. This is a 2x4 wall, not remarkable. But the heat loss through that wall is much smaller. And I point that out, we'll talk about that. So these are Natalie's numbers. Just be aware that you can get into a situation where you have adequate windows and you get talked into buying really great windows with a return on investment of forever. So, you know, if your windows are bad, and I'll show you a bad window, you definitely replace them. But if it's an adequate window, your money may well be spent better on another project. This is a bad window. Okay, this is not recoverable. But if this was the only damage the window had, this would be repairable. And she showed us slides of this. This little bit right here is, I think that's rot, and that's done for. But if this is the only issue and seals applied elsewhere to the window make it airtight, we can then put a storm window over the top of this. And for not a lot of money, we are in business. We are comfortable. This is a casement window at my house. This is the seal hanging there after a summer of opening, closing, opening, and closing. It finally gave out. This is not a seal though. In reality, this is not a seal. But this product here from Menards, this did it. I just took off the old seal, wiped down where the new seal was going with some alcohol to make sure there's no dust or fingerprints or anything like that. And peeled off the release paper and put it on there. And when I thermal imaged that yesterday morning, just to double check, so I wouldn't be a liar, solid. It's right back to its R2 glory of when it was a new window. These are the windows on the north end of my house, and these are made for external screens, but they're not made for storm windows. But that's just a small detail. So I made these latches to make these external storm windows, same thing as Natalie was talking about. 6 of these I had made in the Crosse here for just over $600, including the sales tax. I made the magnetic latches. I'll share the recipe with anybody who's interested. They're very easy to make, but there's just a steel piece on the inside, and the magnetic force through the window holds it in place. It's very easy to do. These windows were made for screens, but not for storm windows, but that didn't slow me down. These are what the latches look like. Again, I'll share the drawing or the recipe with anybody who's interested in making them. They're easy enough to make. This is our introduction to storm windows and vapor profile, because this window is one with the storm window on the outside, and what we have here is ice. This is it's fine that it's that cold, but the rub is that the storm window is sealed more tightly than the window to the house. Well, it's kind of embarrassing because the storm windows didn't cost me that much money, but the challenge is now moisture condenses between those 2 layers of glass all winter long, and in the worst case, that would just fill with ice throughout the winter. So we want to be aware of vapor profile, moisture profile, and what it means is the storm window should not be as snug as the main window. Now, its function of keeping that stationary air layer there, that's pretty straightforward. A small amount of leakage won't destroy that effect. Now, for a really want a brute force solution, these are thermal shutters in my shop. This is a R1 aluminum window, terrible insulation value with some window film over it, and an R10 shutter over it. Anybody interested in an R11 window? Well, it's an R11 window at night, and in the daytime it's open. Or if I'm not busy in the shop, then it's just open. It's closed for months at a time. Not the best solution for most situations, but a window on the north side of the house that one doesn't use very often. It's a consideration. And that's it in the closed position. These are operable by these weights. The 4 windows are lined up on the west side of the building. I just operate them all from this one station. So new windows, we're going to get new windows. We've settled that it's our best solution, but we got to install them better than this, people. This is a new window. This is a new window. This was especially troublesome because the couple had some kids. They had windows installed in 3 batches of 6 from the same reputable company. They were noticing as one batch and then another that their house didn't seem to be that much more comfortable. They didn't know why. And this is very distressing for them to see that's what their money had gotten them. You know, if you look right here, this is the gaps in the window that are needed for it to operate. Very minimal. It's a fine quality window. And then they get this kind of result. But they can do better if they want to take on the project. And this is a mess. You can make it more of a mess if you're not a tidy person. But what we're talking about here is taking the window trim off, masking the area around the window, and then shooting in that the can of Great Stuff foam in the blue can. That's because it expands with good volume but no force, so it doesn't crush a window. It's a mess, but it really is a great way to make, you know, I think for some people, instead of buying new windows, they'd be better off installing properly the windows that they have. And if their windows look like this on thermal imaging and there's leaking here, we could fix some of those leaks. They could seal this with the proper product and they'd be in fine shape without buying new windows. And if you're not going to get your new windows installed any better than this, don't buy them. Oops, excuse me. That is a step backwards, is what people need to realize. So, and then another thought would be, since, well, this used to be a sliding glass door at my house. There was a deck out here. The deck was falling apart. The sliding glass door was falling apart. So I installed this window in that place. So what I want people to ask is, if they are installing new windows, do they need to be the same size as the one that was there? Well, if they're installing them themselves, no, because they're going to take the wall apart and they're going to install the window properly. When a window installer comes out, he just comes out with a sawzall, saws the window out of the hole, slides a new one in, and puts the trim back on, stuffs a little fiberglass here or there, and he calls it close enough. Does nothing about the nailing flange, rain flashing, or any of that stuff, which can only be done when a small amount of the siding is removed. A free install of a window is not going to get you that. If you have a good installation of a window, it looks like this. There's no leakage here. And by the way, this is a window from Habitat for Humanity. This is not a remarkable window. And then this at the end of the arrow, that's an outlet. When I built this short wall, I bagged, that's the term for it, bagged the outlet box. The instructions for that are found all over on the internet. And it works perfectly as far as no air leakage. And this is only in a 2x4 wall. So I'm pretty happy about how that turned out. So at any rate, yeah, to install a window properly, you do have to take a little bit of the wall apart. And then if you're doing that anyways, like in this case where I took the deck off and the sliding glass door out, it was a trivial matter to find the window that I really wanted and put that in that space, as opposed to being limited to what the hole that was already there. Another thing that we're going to see here, this is a lesson again in moisture profile. And that is that these, which didn't work very well, by the way, these are to insulate the bottoms of the windows. They're on the outside. And the reason why is the glass on the inside is the vapor barrier. And then this is on the outside. And I gotten the bright idea to put these on the inside. They're only half or third the height of the window. What we would find is that the glass is cold here. The liquid would run down behind this thermal shutter, and then it would stay there and it would not go away. That would be getting the moisture profile or the vapor barrier wrong. And the equivalent of that is this here. Getting the moisture profile correctly is getting something between you and the source of the moisture. In the north here, that's a vapor barrier just under the sheetrock in our walls. In Florida, the vapor barrier goes on the outside of the house. But people get the idea, well, it's hot here in the summer, so we're going to put the vapor barrier on the outside. And in the winter, it's just like this. It's just the same as standing in an umbrella because you're catching all that moisture that's trying to leave your house. It condenses wherever it's cold, and inside the outside wall, it's cold, and that's where the moisture condenses unless the vapor barrier prevents it from getting there. So if you want to be this guy, you should live in Florida. But another thing that goes terribly wrong here is people will install a thin layer of pink foam on the outside of a house under the siding, and that's vapor impermeable. And it is the same thing as standing in your umbrella, that the moisture that condenses within the wall is prevented from continuing on into the outside world, and it's caught behind that, and you will end up with moisture problems in the wall. So we need to be aware of moisture profile. Now, bigger projects, no thermal imaging required. This is building a box for a window air conditioner. Easy project. This is an R10 box. Shuts it down as far as any kind of heat losses. And you, of course, guys are familiar with canvas covers and things like that that aren't worth beans for keeping the heat in and the cold out. Pipe insulation is also very easy to do. The caveat with pipe insulation is if you use your basement a lot, the heat that is saved by this pipe insulation is going to be made up by a space heater. Your use of your basement determines whether or not insulating pipes makes economic sense for you. If you seldom use the basement, then this is a way to go. It's pretty easy to do. Ditto for duct insulation, although duct insulation is more work. The payoff with duct insulation, though, is that the ducts are almost as warm as the hot water pipes. They're just way bigger. So the heat losses to ducts is pretty significant. And I found that I insulated my ducts that the time it took to warm up the house upstairs was greatly reduced because I wasn't heating the basement. But if you do insulate the ducts, you want to tape them first to seal them, and not with duct tape. Seems obvious, but no, ducts are sealed with aluminum foil tape because it has a higher temperature rating. So, and then we have some other projects here. We're getting close to the end. Name that defect. This is insufficient attic insulation. You've all seen it. This is what it looks like. But do be aware that the insulation could be appropriate, but no venting in the attic whatsoever. And that might trap heat in the attic to make it look like this. So consider the possibility that the attic venting is insufficient. Name this defect. That is all melted right at the edge of the occupied space down below. None of that is an issue at the garage here. What's going on here is this low slope roof has either no insulation at the edge of the where the ceiling joins the wall, or it has been moved. Blown in insulation migrates around like a sand dune in the wind. And it may be that all of that insulation is blown away from that area and it's just bare sheetrock in the attic. So this is insufficiently insulated right at the edge there. Now, because it's insufficiently insulated at the edge, the homeowners will most certainly, as was the case at my house before I fixed that, most certainly be seeing mildew on the underside of the, on their side of the ceiling all along here. So a lot of times that is actually your clue that there's an insulation issue is mildew. It's not necessarily a leaking roof or anything. It can be just an uninsulated area that's cold and water is condensing there. This is the ice dam the day before. This is the ice dam the day of. This is a giant mess. This is all ice here. The ice is built up so high up the roof that the water has pushed up under the shingles and has now dripped down right up against the wall. And in all probability, it will worsen to the point where the water will then drip down on the ceiling inside the house and then down the wall inside the house. That again is a problem with caused by either insufficient insulation or insufficient venting, because our goal is to make sure that snow stays snow, that it doesn't melt, at least not until March or April, and then it's gone. There's another possible problem though. Imagine that this is all clean siding and right at the bottom of the wall is a row of icicles, right at the height of the subfloor. What that can be, and turned out to be at my house, was that the walls were built without a vapor barrier. My house was built before vapor barriers were standard, and moisture is building up in the walls, running down the pink insulation board, and then dripping out at the height of the sole plate. And I found an icicle sticking out of the side of my house. That's a big red flag. Icicle sticking out of the side of my house at the height of the subfloor. And knowing, or a little homework revealed what was going on. So I painted the walls and ceilings with this enamel paint, and that in my testing has been shown to be a good vapor barrier. Not nearly as good as say 6 mil polyethylene, but it's a good vapor barrier and it's easily retrofit. Now older homes, let's say 1970 and before, when latex paints weren't as popular, most probably have so many layers of enamel paint on them already that they're all set. The problem was when we discovered putting styrofoam on the outside of houses and gave up on oil-based paints because latex paints have minimal ability to prevent moisture from passing. The 1990s invention of vapor barriers solved that problem, but there's a 20-year period or so where we don't have vapor barriers and we were inclined to put styrofoam on the outside of the houses. Bad idea. This is a fun picture. This is not nuclear or anything like that. This is a picture I took in La Crosse on a bitter cold night just to see what an uninsulated basement foundation would look like. And that's what it looks like. It's glowing. Well, it's not really hot, but nevertheless, there is some significant heat radiating out of this house. And you can insulate a foundation. This is a big project you can do without thermal imaging. But it's too big of a project. This is my house. I was a big fan of foundation insulation until I did this myself. I trenched down 2 feet all along the length of the house here. It's a lot of work. I'm not on the soapbox anymore, I'll tell you that. And this is an even bigger project. This house may not have been updated since this car was new, but what we can see here is this house needs siding work. And siding replacement time is a great time to put insulation in the walls. And we're not going to talk about this project much, but just to remind you that when you do something like that, you're designing a wall. And you don't design a wall at the counter at Menards. You do your homework. And the 3 words you want, or the three phenomena you want to know a lot about before considering insulating the outside of a house like this and turning this place probably back into the grand home it was at one time. The things you want to learn about are vapor permeability, air permeability, and moisture profile, because you want to design a wall that is warm and breathes properly so it doesn't cause damage to the house. So your big projects require big knowledge, and for your trouble, you can get big benefits. But, and then a consideration, because this is actually a DIY project for the really ambitious fellow or gal, but you could easily pare this project down by doing 1 wall each of 4 years, or depending on the shape of the house, 1 wall every 6 years. This by no means could be done by 1 or 2 people in a year. You would want to do this over many years, and that's reasonable. That's doable. So to wrap up here, Natalie reminded us we can't tear everything down, but we also can't save everything. We're not going to save this one, and there's other places that we just need to accept. Maybe we go in, we take down some of the antiques, some of the nice fixtures, maybe some other things, and some of them we just have to scrape them. It's the reality of places being let go too long, or that people don't live that way anymore. Perhaps they're on too small of a lot or whatever, but it's going to happen. It's going to be part of renewing our homesteads. Some are going to be taken down. So to finish up, our world is on fire. We need to do something about minimizing our damage, especially when our damage is caused by heating homes that are sieves. We live in screened porches. We don't think anything of it. Yeah, we do. We should. It's our money that's paying for this environmental disaster. I'd like to see us do more about it so we can be comfortable and save our money for things we really value. And I knew that before Bill Nye told us that our world is on fire, but if you haven't seen it, he puts on this very nice 40-second video about our world being on fire. You can find it on YouTube by searching his name, Bill Nye, spelled N-Y-E is his last name. It's very funny, a little profane, very funny. Lastly, this one I like a lot. Amory Lovins is an energy guru. He's the one who points out that it's cheaper to save energy than to buy it. And since I've equipped you guys with some tasks you can do for 0 money, it really should be cheaper to save energy than buy it, since you're going to spend nothing to save at least some energy in your home. So that's all I have. We'll entertain questions. Jenny?
Hi, yeah. So looks like we just got 1 question. But as people are sending questions in, I'm also going to encourage people to send in so to give away this gift basket that Pete put together. He organized that if you guess between the numbers 50 and 100, the person who guesses closest to the number that he gave me before the program started, that person will win this gift basket. So start sending in whatever your guess is. And then as we do the Q&A. So the first question, Pete. Tiffany asks, we'd like to insulate the floor of our attic. We're debating 9-inch thick rolled fiberglass insulation with the R value of 30 or versus 9 inches of foam board with the R value of 45. The rolled fiberglass is significantly cheaper, but foam board would add an R value of 15. What do you recommend?
Insulation is sold on a number of parameters, but the one I keep a lot of track of is the R value, or correction, the cost per square foot per R1, which is to say, how much does it cost for R1 times a square foot? It's a small bit of insulation, but the numbers will be interesting for you. And that is that blown-in fiberglass, which Tiffany's not talking about, runs around a penny per R square foot, whereas fiberglass bat is around 2 cents, and pink board is around a nickel per R square foot. But it does get you less space, and it happens where the space is limited, and they'd like to go with more insulation, but they don't have the space. So what do? Do you go with a more expensive insulation, or do you just limit it? Actually, R30 is not a bad insulation level, and I would encourage her to run some numbers. But R30 versus R45 means that at R45, she would have about 2/3 of the cost of heating that space each year. And I think she'll find that it's not that much, that the gain from R30 to R15 is modest. And she would want to then look at, well, okay, so if that reduces my heating bill $25 a year, and it might, does that justify spending tens of hundreds, maybe $1,000 or more on the pink insulation? And it may not justify it. The other thing to consider, which this is a personal thing, and that is the pink insulation board is flammable. And by code, it has to be covered with something non-inflammable, like sheetrock. So she has to figure in that cost too. You just can't slab pink insulation board up without a fireproof covering of some kind. Whereas the fiberglass by itself is non-inflammable, and that's good to go without a covering. So I think by the time she considers the fireproof covering for the pink insulation, it may not, as we say in the biz, it may not pencil out as far as the extra R value for the extra effort and cost.
Thanks. And Tiffany, if there's anything you want to follow up with that, feel free to put it in the chat. We have another question here. And only a few people have answered their guess yet. So I'll say it again. If you guess between 50 and 100, the number closest to the number that Pete gave me will win this $50 basket. So you still have some time to put some numbers in.
Or thermal imaging in a COVID safe manner.
Thank you, yes. Gift basket or thermal imaging. So Jen asks, I learned that my walls have no insulation. It's a 1930 house with asbestos siding. What is the best way to insulate?
We have to define best. Probably the easiest way would be in the house built in 1930, certainly has many layers of enamel paint on the inside already. So blowing in cellulose or blowing in fiberglass from the outside is probably the easiest to do. And if there's life left in your asbestos siding and you don't really feel like paying for the cost of removal, I would do that. I would put in blown in insulation from the outside. And really with the vapor barrier you have from your enamel paint, that's not a bad solution. And I'm a little surprised to hear a house from 1930 is found to have no insulation at all. I wonder if she means that it's settled greatly. Can you ask?
Yeah, Jen, do you have any clarification for that?
Well, at any rate, for the other listeners, if the house is worth it, what you would do instead is to take off that asbestos siding, dispose of that, put in fiberglass insulation probably from the outside, and then put a more up-to-date siding on the outside. Perhaps I should say a layer of fiberglass, then OSB for the structure, and then siding over that.
She also asked if you're available for consultation. Is that something you'd be willing to do?
As long as they do something with the information, the answer is yes. That's the caveat. I'm expecting people to do something with their newfound information. Yeah, so the answer is yes. No charge, by the way. I just need you to do something with the information.
So, okay. So Anita asked, when did vapor barrier become standard?
Around 1985, some homes were built with them, some weren't. A friend built a home in 1983 and the vapor barrier was in the walls, but the building inspector didn't want it in the ceiling. My coworker put it in the ceiling anyways. The building inspector insisted that they cut a 5-foot diameter hole in the vapor barrier, which he did while the inspector was there. And then they covered the vapor barrier, the big hole in the vapor barrier. So figure late 1980s, it became standard. However, it took a lot longer for people to do a good job of installing vapor barriers, which is to say overlapping the various segments, the ceiling with the wall properly, and bagging outlets, which is what I showed you in that one slide of the wall underneath the window that replaced the sliding glass door. That is even 5 years ago, that was relatively new. So you're typically going to find a vapor barrier in homes built in 1990 or newer, a vapor barrier though that is compromised, at least by modern standards.
Anita also asked, how do you feel about metal roofing?
I think metal roofing is the way to go, whether it's steel or aluminum. I think that in terms of durability and many other things, it is the way to go. The one caution I have, and my house has a metal roof, I don't know if it showed in the slides, but it does, is that snow slides off of metal roofs and you have to plan for a fall zone. And you really want the snow to slide off your roof. There's no reason to have all that weight up there, but you have to plan for where it will land, because it will. The layout of my house ended up with a porch in a location that didn't specifically anticipate a metal roof. And when that snow slides off and avalanches the porch, that snow is as heavy and hard as cement to remove. So that's the only caveat on metal roofs. I think they're the way to go.
Well, I haven't had any other questions yet. So 2 people guessed the same number, and that's the closest number. So Anita and Jen, I need you to give a new guess.
Or we could toss a coin.
Or we could toss a coin.
Or
Anita did guess it second, so
we'll figure out something, but we'll either toss a coin or those 2 can guess again, either way.
She just told me that Jen can have it. So
Okay.
Jen has won. So you're gonna also give her consulting. So then she also gets it.
Oh, okay.
Or else Anita can have the gifts and I'll take the consulting.
I will have an email between the 3 of you and you can decide this.
It's all good to me as long as people do something. As I say, our world is on fire and we're the ones who are paying to finance the fire.
So I don't have any other questions in the chat. We do have a few. Oh, I have one more question coming. We just have a few more minutes before 8, so I think we'll fit this question in. Oh, Josh asked what the number is. It was 70.7.
Does he know that that's 50 times the square root of 2?
Josh, I think you're a math professor, are you not? So maybe he does.
All right, so Jen, you'll get me the contact information then?
For Anita and Jen, yeah, I can do that.
Okay. And then Jen, just so that people know this online, get the information. Anyone who wants my contact information, I should have posted it on a slide, but I didn't think of it. But if they ask you, you may give them my contact information, phone number and email is fine.
Yeah, so I have Jen's email because of her registering for the program, and I have your email, so I can get you all in contact with one another.
Okay, that sounds good. I mean, anyone who makes the time and effort to attend the Zoom session should be helped in any way that I can, and I will do that.
So Tiffany asked one last question. Adding foam board to the exterior of a roof between the shingles and the sheathing on the exterior.
Well, that is interesting because typically, at least here in the north, The attics are insulated on the top of the ceiling. And if she would confirm that, if the insulation is in fact up in the rafters, right up against the roof deck, then what she would have is insulation beyond that. Correction, she would have foam board beyond, for example, fiberglass, and that would pose the risk of trapping moisture in the fiberglass. That would be the moisture profile thing we were talking about, where you want, kind of like the fur on a polar bear, you want each layer going outward to be looser than what was inside. So the polar bear is very well insulated, tight fur, blubber, it's on the inside, and then each layer of fur going out is looser. We want that on the house, which is to say, for a wall, we would have the pink board inside the house, then we'd have the fiberglass, and then we would have the siding beyond that. Each layer going out being looser, more prone to airflow, more prone to drying, so the moisture gets carried away. And it's not clear that, I believe that was Tiffany, that her roof situation is that, but that's what you want to guard against, is the outermost layer being sealed up, which XPS pink insulation board would do. So it depends on where her insulation is. She can contact me and we'll go over that.
Okay, sure. I'll put you guys in touch as well then. Is that okay?
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. So we'll wrap this up here now. Thank you all for attending. Feel free to send me an email if you also have questions for Pete, and I can get you in contact with him. Jen just said, excellent presentation. Thanks, Pete. And I agree, it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all who took the time and cared to attend.